Hello, Alex Caithness here, the lead developer for RabbitHole. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to take a look at RabbitHole, and in order to help you get the best from your trial, in this video I'll provide a quick start guide highlighting how to make use of the key features of the tool. Each time you launch RabbitHole, you'll be greeted by a nice, clean, empty window. In order to start exploring your data, you'll need to bring it into the tool. This can be done in one of four ways. Let's start with the easiest and most convenient method, which is simply to drag a file into the window. You can see here that we're being asked whether or not we want to start a dig. A dig in RabbitHole is a project file which contains all of the data that we've imported into the tool and all of the actions that we've taken with that data. Working within a dig is great from an auditability standpoint because it allows us to review all of the data and all of the actions that we have taken to get to the results that we have provided. But for our purposes, seeing as we are only previewing a file, I'm going to select no. When we import data into RabbitHole, we need to choose the initial data format viewer that we're going to use for this data. In RabbitHole, the term that we use for these viewers is a reparser. As we're currently not sure what this data might represent, a good starting point will often be a hex view. Now we'll come back to this data to explore it further, but first let's look at the other three ways of getting data into the tool. The first of these methods is to provide the path of the file that you want to open to the RabbitHole executable as an argument. This can be as simple as dropping the file on top of the executable icon or shortcut. You could also do this at the command line, or indeed you can configure RabbitHole to be used as an external viewer in another forensic tool like this. The next method is to simply make use of the open file menu item here, or by using the Ctrl-O shortcut. This works in exactly the same way as drag drop, except we need to provide the path to the file here. The final method is very convenient if you have some data in the clipboard which you would like to process with RabbitHole. We can either bring it in by using the Open from Clipboard item in the File menu, or by using the Ctrl-Shift-V shortcut. From here we can choose a reparser which is most suitable for our data. So let's come back to the data that we brought into RabbitHole. In RabbitHole, the ultimate goal really is to get the data into a form that is going to be most useful for you from the perspective of exploring the data and reporting on it. As we can see on the right-hand side of our hex viewer here, this data is clearly textual in nature, so looking at the data in a hex editor is probably an inefficient way of doing things. So in RabbitHole, at any point we can take all of our data or a selection of our data and choose to reparse that data into a new form. To do this, generally speaking, we either select some of our data or select none of it, and implying the whole data, right-click, choose Reparse As, and select a new view for this data. So as this is textual data, I'm going to select Text View. Here RabbitHole is asking us to pick a text encoding for this data. In this case, RabbitHole has correctly guessed at the text encoding scheme, which is UTF-8, but whenever RabbitHole makes a guess, it will always give you the opportunity to override that guess if you know better. So if we happen to know that this was in fact a Unicode, UTF-16, or ASCII, we could choose differently. But as it happens, we can select UTF-8 and click OK and get our data in a text view. This text view is clearly closer to something that would be useful to us. However, if we look at the data and we see all of these braces and brackets, this suggests that this data is not just plain text, and rather it is JSON encoded data. As JSON is a tree structured or hierarchical data type, it's inefficient once again to be viewing this data in a flat text viewer. So once again, we can choose to right click, reparse as, and choose a viewer which is going to be better suited to this data. You can see now that RabbitHole has prettified the text to give it an easier to read structure, but more importantly, perhaps on the left-hand side, we now have a tree that we can navigate the data with, allowing us to see the full structure of the data in a hierarchical fashion. Within this data, we can see that there are timestamps, for example, here. So rather than processing the entire data, we can instead choose just this timestamp, right-click, reparse as epoch time, and now we're able to calculate this timestamp. Once again, RabbitHole has guessed at the timestamp format that is in use here, correctly in this case. But as with the text encoding, we have the option to override this choice either by choosing one of these presets or by changing the epoch date and unit associated with this timestamp. At any point when we're exploring our data, we can right-click on a tab and click Show Processes to see what processes were undertaken to get to this point, including the areas of the data which were processed. We can also right-click on a tab and click Go to Original Data to jump back to the tab which spawned the tab, and indeed the specific data point within that tab. The data which I've imported into RabbitHole in this case is taken from Mozilla Firefox, and it represents all of the installed extensions for this particular user. We can see clearly from the left-hand tree view here that what we have are multiple objects which all have similar structures. Traditionally, if we wanted to get the data from this file, we would maybe write a script or make use of grep patterns, or even resort to just using manual copying and pasting. But because this file has a structure, RabbitHole is able to process it as records and provide a report to us. This particular process will work for any file type which has a hierarchy, such as XML, property lists, protocol buffers, Java serialization streams, and more. So to begin this process, we want to identify an example of an individual record. Each of these objects here represent an extension, so we can treat each of these as a record. So let's choose this first item here. We can right-click, go to Report Building, and Build Record Query. Now within this particular object, we can begin to identify the various different fields which are of interest to us. So for example, this identifier here might be interesting to us, so we can right-click on this particular item, go to Report Building, and Build Field Query. Similarly, this friendly name for the extension and the corresponding description will be interesting, so we can do the same thing, right-click, Report Building, and Build Field Query for each of these two. Finally, these timestamps here will also likely be of use, so we can, again, right-click on these and Build Field Query. So if we now go over to the Report Builder tab, we can see that we already have a report built for us containing the identifiers, names, descriptions of the extensions installed, and also some timestamps associated with their installation and update. Currently, these timestamps are in an epoch format, so these would be able to be converted in a spreadsheet program, but we can also do this directly inside RabbitHole by going up to the field definitions here, and from the parser drop-down, we can choose the appropriate timestamp format to have these be decoded automatically. From this point, we're now able to export the contents of the grid to various different formats, and we're also able to save the query that we've built here so that the next time we have to process the extensions that are installed by Mozilla Firefox, we already have a query ready to go. Different reparsers, of course, will have different methods of getting data out, but this particular process that we've gone through here is the same for pretty much every single tree structured data type that RabbitHole currently supports. RabbitHole already supports a wide range of data formats, with new formats being added with every version. However, if you're seeing data formats which aren't currently supported by RabbitHole, then we're always interested in hearing requests for new data formats to be added for the tool. I hope this video has provided an introduction to the workflow in RabbitHole, but if you have further questions during your trial period, please do reach out and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you for listening.